Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series. I'm your host, Shae. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I live and work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. This podcast has been proudly sponsored by IMC Training. With more than 25 years' experience, 12 international locations, and 350 employees, IMC is the leading full-service provider for digital training. Experts in the field of technology, e-learning content and strategy work hand in hand to provide holistic and customised e-learning solutions worldwide. I was so delighted to come across today's guest through LinkedIn. Natalia is a Business Transformation Analyst, the Global Neurodiversity Advancement Leader and leader of Global Neurodiversity at IBM. Natalia is a proud neurodivergent and parent of an autistic IT professional. Nat enables businesses to see the value in embracing neurodiverse talent to attain highly skilled and dedicated professionals that may otherwise be overlooked. Natalie and I spoke about all things HR, neurodiversity in the workplace, and how IBM is making critical changes to ensure their neurodiverse staff work in an inclusive, supportive, strength-based environment. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed speaking with Nat. I'm super excited to have on the show today Nat, all the way from Pennsylvania. So I think this is only my second or third interview with someone in the United States. So welcome to the show, Nat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for our listeners, I connected with Nat through LinkedIn, actually, when I was putting some posts out about our conference, and I saw her amazing job title and LinkedIn profile, and I thought this looks like such an awesome lady to interview. And I think one of the amazing things about Dear Dyslexic is the amount of generosity we get from people all around the world giving up their time to talk to us about dyslexia and neurodiversity. So thank you again for coming to chat to us today, Nat. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Nat Lychowski, and I've been honored and blessed to be a part of the IBM family for over 27 years. And the past 5 years there, I've been focusing on neurodiversity advancement. And as of November 1st, I was honored to accept a brand new role as Global Neurodiversity Advancement Leader. And this is one thing that I feel sets IBM apart from some of the other wonderful companies out there working in neurodiversity, in which we're focusing as much on our culture change and acceptance and development, as well as the hiring pilots, because they really need to be done together. So if you possibly have an organization that may be only focusing on hiring and not the culture change, you may not get the same result as if you're focusing on both. My own personal life, I grew up feeling that I was broken or what was wrong with me. And it wasn't until college that I was formally recognized as, being dyslexic and a few other flavors of neurodiversity. And I specifically use formally recognized because I don't like that word dyslexic, because it moves everything to that medical deficits model. We don't go to the doctor to find out if we're gay or Asian or anything else. So you may hear me use some specific language in there. And I think through that, I developed an empathy and love for the underdog. And then as my life journey continued, I had a son who was formally recognized as autistic when he was 6, and was able to empower him to find his own strengths and to understand where his weaknesses might be and where to work that. And I learned I had to fight. I had to fight the schools. I have the scars on my back from working with, teachers and other administrators. And it really going through the journey in his eyes, seeing, the difficulty in university and beyond really lit all of these fires for me.
So there's two things I'd love to unpack with you. One, which we're going to talk about, is neurodiversity and your work at IBM. But also, secondly, the language you just used then, because I love talking about language at the moment. Part of my doctorate that I'm undertaking is it just happened to come out of the research is around language and labeling. But you used the word, you didn't use diagnosed.
No, I used formally recognized.
Yes, which I've never heard that term before, and very much moves away from that medical model of the labels. So that's a conscious choice. Is that something that's very common in the US, or is that just a conscious personal choice for how you look at things?
I think it's a conscious choice that I've heard one or few others, and I just it really rung true to me. And it helps eliminate all of these systemic discrimination issues with individuals, especially adults, trying to get that diagnosis, whether it's autism, dyslexia, ADHD, because we don't fit the mold, right? So trying to find a medical provider that takes your insurance plan that you do. In some countries, you have to pick and choose based upon what insurance plan they're under, trying to find one with experience in adults and trying to go through all of those burdens. And even if you finally find the right provider, you may be faced with an unconscious bias where they may, in my case, I was given a booklet and a number 2 pencil, and they said, here, fill this out. And, the very first question was asking me about my homework assignments. And it was written in the early 90s. And obviously there's bias in there probably for cisgender white 8-year-old affluent boys and not, an adult professional. So trying to move that burden off of the individual. We don't ask for such proof of who we are. If you were a woman and needed to go have a break in the day to pump breast milk, or if you needed a break in the day to go pray, we don't put these burdens on that individual to say, prove that you need to go do this. And neurodiversity should be accepted as any other factor there. And I love language too. The same things with special needs. Well, are glasses a special need, right? Or being left-handed or right-handed, these aren't, it's about equity. Words like those labeling words like functioning, you have a high-functioning son. Whereas if we change language to a high support needs son or a low support can be measured externally, how many hours of service the person gets, as opposed to saying, oh, can you read an analog clock and do your own taxes and tie your shoes? I can't do any of those. So does that make me not, low functioning? So I think the language is very empowering. The same as if, I say I'm a woman, I'm not a person with a uterus, although at my age, somebody could take it and I'll be happy with that. But, it goes to, identity and empowerment.
Oh, I think I could have a whole separate podcast with you talking about language. And yeah, when I started the foundation, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I just wanted to help people like me. And on this journey, I really started to learn so much around disability and language and what people, it's constantly changing. So you mentioned how IBM has a big role around with supporting neurodiverse staff. And recently I heard the term neurominority, and now we're called a neurominority group. And I struggle to keep up with all the different terms. And sometimes I just say to my partner, I'm just a person. Why is there a new label to explain us? So why are we being grouped with all these different disorder, diversity, disability, whichever term you'd like to use?
Correct.
And so I think that's where I'm starting to get, and partly because I trained as a speech pathologist, I think I'm starting to think I really want to learn more about this because it's constantly changing and we're constantly being labelled and we're just all humans at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And when you do make things more neurodivergent friendly, you make things more human friendly. Although I agree, whether it's diversibility, disability, I've heard neuroplastic, I've heard neurominority. I think there's power in identity. And I think having that identity lets us rally together. I've heard a lot of people like, oh, we're all a little neurodivergent.
That's my partner.
And my answer to that is, like if somebody gets, chronic migraine headaches and you go, oh, everybody gets headaches. Or if everybody can experience anxiety, whether it's a first date or a job interview, but if the anxiety affects you at your base level to factor against, how you work, how you leave the house, all of the stigmas on, mental health meds, which is probably a whole nother podcast. I think it's important to have that identity and to be able to say, I can help you and you can help me. And there's that sense of representation, which is critical, not only for the movement, but also critical in IBM's neurodiversity program.
So do you find, and I'm excited to talk about what IBM's doing, but do you find that by putting, and this is in the workplace too, if we look at IBM as an example, do you find that by putting us all together, and when I say us, the neurodiverse community, that it waters down the individual needs of the person or the individual needs of the difference or difficulty? Because we do have separate, people with autism, have social skills differences, and we have writing difficulties or reading difficulties.
Absolutely. I don't think so. I think it goes to that sense of equity. Everybody in, the PW, people with disabilities, also have different flavors, from vision impaired to hearing impaired to mobility issues. They're all different as well. And they're all clumped under the PWD, PWDA. So I think having all of the neurodivergence under that same group, or like saying the LGBT community, and while that may cover the L and the G and the B and the T, they're all different, but they do have similar base core needs of understanding, of acceptance. So I can understand how that could be the flip side of making a them versus us, and that's not what we want to do. But by having an us, we can create psychological safety, which I think is the key.
That's a great way of looking at it, because I think in Australia at the moment, like dyslexia there's such a lack of awareness and understanding, but the neurodiversity movement is coming in, and although it's been focused on autism, we're starting to work with more and more companies around trying to broaden our scope of work to encompass neurodiversity as a whole. And it's how do you ensure that all those needs are met. But I like what you bring it back to, the core. I think that's a really nice way of explaining it. Thank you for listening to this podcast. The D Hub is our digital learning space where you can access our first Australian e-learning courses for those working and supporting dyslexic employees, as well as webisodes, online courses, communities of practice, and much, much more. So head to the D Hub today and start your learning journey. dhub.ddyslexic.com.
You can, be dyslexic and dyscalculic and be an ADHDer and possibly be formally recognized on those and be self-recognized as autistic. And these are all of these things that may help you. And it really goes about, this individual program. We can make a menu of, and it's some things that, other companies, and we try to collect to say, here's a menu of things that have helped people, kind of like an a la carte menu to help to help go through your brain to say, oh, that's a great idea. That might help me, or let me try that. And it's not that you have to take the full menu, but you can go through that as a guide and even maybe find something that you can add to the menu to help the next.
Yeah. Wow, that's a nice way of looking at it. So can you explain your menu at IBM and the wonderful work that you do?
where to begin. We have a whole buffet. So our journey started in 2015, which actually is a little later than a lot of other companies. Some companies started, 10 years ago, and we started 5. And it did start with an autism focus. Autism usually gets the most oxygen in the room when you're talking about neurodiversity. And we partnered with Specialist Sterna to create a autism hiring friendly cohort. And we started that in Lansing, Michigan. And since then, we now have targeted neurodivergent hiring programs in 11 countries around the world. So that's one differentiator I like to call out with our program, is that we're global. And the other, which is really exciting, actually 2, I can't decide which is better. So 2 and 2.1 is that we are collaboratively managed by neurodivergents and neurotypicals. So our executive sponsor, Tony Horton, he's a VP, and he is openly dyslexic. And our head of PWDA, Diane Delaney, she is also neurodivergent, and myself. So we're giving a voice to the actual programs. And while allies can be helpful, sometimes the well-intentioned ally, may be harmful. But we do work very closely in synergy with our neurotypical allies, but we have to ensure representation. So we have an ERG, and we have what I'm really, really excited about and get a little emotional about too, is that we've developed safe spaces for neurodivergence through virtual communities. So we have global Slack channels, one called Actually Autistic, one called Actually Neurodivergent. We have one for neurodivergent families and caregivers, and then we have the general neurodiversity channel for all allies, all neurodivergents, and all closeted neurodivergents who might be out in those safe space channels, but not out publicly. And the safe space channels, we actually call them task forces. The reason we call them task forces is not to have people think, oh, this is just the warm, fuzzy, oh, we're going to support each other, which is very important, right? Psychological safety is huge. You can ask for advice on your, something happened with your manager or your partner at home, and really be raw and honest and candid, which is so needed. You can have this community of peers to say, oh, this is what works for me. But it's not just that. This is a place where we have the community where we can rally, where we can say, what do we want to do for April? Or, hey, with my liaison to benefits and HR, I can bring to that community and say, IBM has been invited to partner with this organization. What do you think? Or this new benefits package. And we can get vetting from the community, which is huge. And to offer that safe space and that voice, which, since it's safe space, people can be free to say yes or no, I don't like this, or report in biases, whether it's, in our tools, whatever it is, to go through. And no different than any other identity group, that representation is critical. If it was a women's initiative, would the owners and main stakeholders be all men? No, right? Clearly. So if our motto is nothing about us without us, and we take that very, very seriously.
How do you encourage other organizations? Like, that's amazing to have the Slack channels that create that psychological safety in the workplace. I mean, it's so important, and it's great to hear you use those terms. And I think, how do we encourage other workplaces to see the value in putting the time and effort in to set up those type of structures so that people feel safe and they feel like they're contributing? And you can't, from my research, people are so fearful of disclosing at the moment that, particularly in Australia, that then it's hard to build those safe spaces because people are just so scared to come out in the first place. So how do you support that within IBM, and then that broader question of how do you think?
I think there's one big blocker, and that's imposter syndrome, where you have so many individuals, if you're not familiar with the term, you probably are, where people may have gone for that diagnosis and the doctor said, oh, you're far too social, or you just read slow. You don't need. So it's that bias that we have in there, which is a whole separate piece. But how do you build culture and safe space for the neurodivergent community? I'm going to answer the question with another question, which I really hate when people do, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is, how do you develop safe spaces for the Black community, for the LGBT community, for any, for the Pan-Asian community? And it's the same answer, which is you have to start the conversations, you have to find allies, you have to build a culture where people are free to come out. It's kind of like showing your pronouns. If you're using the word neurodiversity, if you're talking about it, and then you have, like, we have an internal website with all of the resources, and we have 2 or 3 gatekeepers. I'm one of them for the safe spaces to say, all you do is email me and say, I'm neurodivergent and I want it. And then when you get in, there's a whole honor system, like, rules of what is said here stays here unless you have permission. Obviously, if there's an issue, like an HR issue that is reported, then I may contact that person one-on-one and try to guide them through that to, self-report, as just as we would if anybody was, in crisis or in any other thing. But it's just a start. And, we started with just, 50 people in our ERG. And since then, we've had over 4,500 IBMers take our neurodiversity acceptance training. And we've reached about 14,000 IBMers just in introducing the topic. So a big part of our program, we call it the 3 A's. And the first is awareness. So people need to be aware of the conversation, aware of microaggressions, aware of what this is. But you can't stay there for long. It's a great place to start. It's like when you play the little board games as a kid, everybody started on the little box that said start. Or that's the start of your journey. But if you stay there, you fall into this trap that awareness can still breed discrimination. Right? You can be aware that, say, a Muslim family moved on your street. I'm aware. And if you are not willing to take that next step, what are you doing? So we start with awareness. And we also understand from a cultural standpoint, whether you're in Japan or India or the US or Australia, there's also cultural stereotype or cultural biases that all tie into this, right? Because we're not just neurodivergent. We're neurodivergent and women, and we're a combination of things. So our next step after awareness is to focus on acceptance. And that's when people are being educated and then taking action. Asking questions, and moving into that place. Work on hiring, work on looking where there are blockers in your programs. And the final A would be advancement. And that's where you're trying to ensure the neurodivergents are being offered the same opportunities, whether a team leader or manager or a leadership position, or even asking their opinion, having them have a voice, and really moving through that. And we're trying to, make changes along the way. So a few years ago, IBM, for April, we celebrated Autism Awareness Month, like everybody else. And then we upped the game to Autism Acceptance Month. And then we upped it again to Neurodiversity Acceptance Month. We're still wordsmithing, but, possibly you may see other language coming in this April, like Neurodiversity Celebration Month or Pride. And the ND movement is really following the LGBT plus movement so much, in which, being a member of that LGBT plus community 30, 40, 50 years ago in the US, and obviously in different places, different countries, it was a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And there were treatments and medicines and, how to act normal. And now we've progressed. There's still work to do in that community, But from a corporate standpoint, it started grassroots, and then a couple of executive sponsors gotten in, and then working to work on middle management. And now you have corporations, focusing on pronouns and building that safe space. And the neurodiversity movement is really following that far more than, say, people with mobility impairments or the like.
Wow, we've got so much to learn from overseas. And I just keep thinking about, we're just at the A, but I love the 3, awareness, acceptance, and advancement, because I thought that the third A would be action, but you've included acceptance with action, which makes sense. It's such a good philosophy, and I see it in my research, and it's been hard to articulate. And that's what we're missing at the moment, is all three of those. But we're at a starting point of the awareness component of it.
Thinking about neurodiversity as another chapter in your diversity story is, I think, when we're going to get that most progress, because we don't need a pity party, right? We don't just want this, this is warm fuzzy, this is corporate citizenship, this is something that is nice to do. The data is now proven to say it's not a why you should do this, it's a matter of why not. Who doesn't like increased revenue and more loyal employees and more empathetic managers and more candid feedback and more growth mindset and skills? And all of these things a company can access for very, very low cost, if not free in sometimes. It's a matter of being able to say, I work best here. And instead of asking that, what accommodation do you need to really change the language again, to just say, how can I help you succeed? And see where it goes. And maybe it's, to help me succeed, I would rather sit in a quiet part of the office building, not by the elevator or, where there's a lot of commotion, or I need noise canceling headphones, or I would like to start my day 30 minutes later so I'm not exhausted from the commute and I could hit my desk with a full battery and then stay later in the day, or I work better at home, or, I have adult parents that I need to tend to, or whatever it may be. And when you think about making things more neurodivergent friendly, you're just making things human friendly. And a lot of times the neurodivergents are kind of seen as the canary in the coal mine, that we're very, very sensitive to these things, but it really can help everyone, kind of like the curb cuts we see on the sidewalk, right? They were meant for one thing, but can help people with strollers and carts. And
it's really around universal design principles, isn't it? That it's helpful for everyone when you're able to work in those types of flexible environments, and when you feel safe to say, yeah, I do need, or this will help me to be my best, and encouraging workplaces. How do you think we can start to make that shift, do you think, globally and in workplaces, to think more open-minded? And I think COVID has really helped in that sense around we were forced to work from home, which, most employers would have had a pink fit about, I'm sure. But now it's
actually COVID's actually been a silver liner for many working in maybe the smaller companies that had never embraced work from home, or never focusing on having honest conversations to say, this is what I need. My child has remote learning and I can work 2 hours and then I need to take a break, and everybody is being far more empathetic. So COVID's actually been a silver liner or silver lining to a lot of people and a lot of companies to say, wow, my people can be productive, either working from home or working on a split shift, and, seeing things in a different light.
Do you think that will help support the needs of neurodiverse people in the workplace now that COVID's come and we've had these different opportunities to work?
I would hope so. I think COVID has made everybody have to think about working differently, being more personally resilient, having to, rally together and take care of each other, and think about the skill, and think about hiring not in spite of somebody's being dyslexic, but because they are dyslexic, listing it as a skill. I was, on a job interview, and somebody had asked, how are you at multitasking? And I'm like, I'm neurodivergent, right? This is my wheelhouse. I thrive in a multitasking, constantly changing environment because that's my life. And I think the answer was they were just like, I've never heard that answer before. And I'm like, this is what it is. I think we have to really work on this environment and this culture change. And I've said it, kind of a key phrase that I use in that: you can't sow seeds in sand. So, as we do these targeted hirings, as we get in more apprenticeships and internships, and IBM through our new collar NEW program, we no longer even require advanced degrees because a lot of neurodivergents may drop out of school, or the unemployment rate and underemployment rate, PhD in machine learning, working at a coffee shop. Why? Because they don't smile the right way during an interview, or they shake your hand like a weird dead fish. And what does that really have to do with anything? But it's about building that environment. When you put a new seed in, it can put down roots, and that's where you get your higher loyalty. But when you do that, when you're amending the soil and getting rid of the blockers, the rocks and sticks, and adding manure in, then everyone could really blossom.
I feel slightly emotional because I think, wow, it renews me with hope and makes me excited for the future of Australians that are neurodiverse, because I think if organisations in Australia can look at the different models in the US, particularly your work, and I think it might help remove some of the fear they have. There's definitely a huge movement starting around employing people with autism, which is fantastic, and these specific programs to get people with autism in. There's a lot more TV programs in Australia around people with autism, and it's looking at how do we diversify that and grow it so that all of us are supported in the workplace. And it just gives me such hope. And
our second pilot for neurodivergent hiring, was in Australia, and we do have a huge group there. Andrew Williams, Belinda Sheehan, all of us, and this is what's really beautiful about this project, that we have so many allies and so many people self-identifying. Every day we get more and more people to come out. We recently got our first NDer in India to come out. We know they're all there. It's the same, 1 in 50, 1 in 20, and that we're out there. And, breaking these stereotypes, like you said, you see in social media, or you see in, television programs, the Sheldon Cooper of Big Bang, right? White, cisgender, male, really good in IT, kind of nerdy, kind of adorkable. But it could be a Black trans Asian accountant, or it could be somebody in HR, or an artist, or a lawyer, or an accountant. And to really, embrace that difference. One interesting thought that I'll kind of have people, or have you percolate on, is that if we go back in time to the indigenous people of our countries, right? There were communities, hunters and gatherers. They were in communities of 20 to 50 people. And usually there was 1 or 2 people in that community that saw the world a little differently. They knew which leaf could cure and which leaf could kill. They were able to read the signs of the season to know when the tribe should migrate. They had big thoughts, and they were revered for that. They were the shamans. They were the medicine people. And they weren't shamed for being different. Their skill was embraced in the community. So what's interesting is that same ratio that we see is that same 1 in 20, 1 in 50. So the neurodivergents were always on the planet, and now we have to come together to find our voice again.
This has been such a positive, enlightening, educating conversation for myself. I've just loved every minute of talking with you today, Nat, and I'd love to have some more follow-up podcasts to hear how you're going in IBM and the amazing work you're doing. Is there anything you'd like to say to the neurodivergent community, or it could be employers or managers that are listening right now?
I would just say, just start having the conversation. If you are neurodivergent, consider coming out because you're going to help others. We've seen neurodivergents, several that have been in the closet and then they came out just to our safe space group. And then they started speaking, to their manager to get some success enablers or things to help them in their job. And now they're mentoring others. Now they're, getting TEDx's or speaking at, big conferences on this. So, maybe just think to tell one person and see where you are. From a corporate standpoint, work to not be in sand, right? Build this environment like where you can show your pronouns, where you're saying the word neurodiversity, where you're asking for questions, and ensure that the organizations that you're working with are neurodivergent led and have representation. I would say that's the biggest misstep is, going to, maybe an organization that says, we're going to help you do this. And they don't have any neurodivergence on their board of directors or in their leadership, or they have that, we can fix you, we can cure you. Let's do, genetic research to get rid of the gene, which can only lead to eugenics. But just start and have the hard conversations.
I love that. The foundation, my work is all around made by dyslexics, led by dyslexics, and maybe in time we will turn that into neurodivergence. But I've always had a strong philosophy that from our board down, we have people that work with us that are dyslexic or neurodiverse on our board. We have to have a mix of both neurodiverse
Absolutely.
and neurotypical.
Absolutely. It has to be a conversation on both, and it's okay to have that identity. And you may hear people say, "Oh, we're all a little neurodivergent," or we're all, and just think about, the language that you're saying. Usually when I talk or I do a podcast, I'll get some feedback afterwards to say, "Oh, my second cousin's nephew is dyslexic." Sometimes I'm a little sassy and my answer is great, and my hairdresser is gay.
I love that.
Which is, I'm happy to talk about this, and I'm happy you could recognize that, but it really does nothing to the cause unless we're taking action and getting the voices of.
Well, that is a wonderful way to wrap up the conversation. But my final question, which is totally different, is sorry, my brain just slowed down for a minute then, is what gets you up in the morning?
I would say I've always been a family of servant leaders. My dad was a first responder in military. Scouting is part of my life. I'm a third generation scout and still a scout leader. And it's seeing the seeds that I've sown, really grow. It's seeing the people that I've mentored now mentoring others, and it's in seeing that progress. I try to keep that attitude. It doesn't always happen, and I'm a big proponent of spoon theory, so I try to balance my spoons and practice self-care when I should, or actually more call it like organized procrastination than
I love that.
Than anything. But there's so much work to do, and we have so many people who are excited about this that can see that it's not a why should we do this? It's a matter of how.
Well, thank you so much. I've just learned so much from talking to you today. So I'm just so grateful that we were able to connect on LinkedIn. Thank you. Thank you for giving up your time right before the holiday season. And
absolutely.
I hope you have a safe and wonderful holiday. And thank you again. I really hope this is not the last time we get to have a chat, Nat.
I'm like a stray cat.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to touch base, and I really look forward to seeing how things unfold in IBM. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
To find out more about Nat and her amazing work with IBM, head to deardyslexic.com. And if you haven't done so yet, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we're doing, including our advocacy and awareness work, peer support programs, research, and the D-Hub, our digital learning platform for all your needs. If you love this podcast, well, why not sponsor one today? To find out more, head to deardyslexic.com.